The Wyoming wind didn't whisper. It screamed. It screamed of the debt festering in the soil of Hartwell Ranch, of the vultures circling in tailored suits from the bank, and of the slow, rattling breath of my dying father. I, Elara Vance, stood vigil in the room that smelled of camphor and decay, my hand swallowed by his, a hand that had once gentled wild mustangs, now reduced to a collection of trembling bones. "The ranch," he rasped, each word a battle. "Promise me, Elara, it's all that's left of her, of us." He meant my mother, the woman whose memory was woven into every fence post and every sunrise over this valley. I nodded, the weight of that promise settling in my soul like a stone. I would save Hartwell Ranch, even if it cost me everything. 3 days after we buried him on the hill overlooking the land he loved, the man who had orchestrated our ruin came to collect. But it wasn't the devil himself at my door. It was his son. Caleb Blackwood stood on my porch, his Stetson in his hands, his eyes the color of a winter storm. I leveled my father's Winchester at his chest, my fingers snug against the trigger. "Your father sends you to finally gloat, Blackwood?" I snarled. He didn't flinch. "My father doesn't know I'm here." His voice was low, steady, a stark contrast to the tempest in my heart. "I have a proposition, Miss Vance, one that will save your ranch and give you the weapons to destroy mine." The name Blackwood was a curse in our valley. Silas Blackwood, Caleb's father, hadn't just been my father's rival. He was his predator. For 10 years, Silas had waged a silent war, sabotaging our cattle drives, bribing our buyers, and spreading whispers that choked our credit. He wanted this land, this water, this legacy. My father's stubborn pride was the only dam holding back Silas's greed, and his death had just shattered it. I was 24 years old, armed with a degree in animal husbandry from back east and a heart full of fury. But against the Blackwood Empire, I was a child with a stick facing a cannon. Caleb's proposition was insanity wrapped in a silver tongue. "Marry me," he said, his gaze unwavering. "In name only. The union will merge our holdings under a single name, mine. It will instantly clear your debts and shield you from my father's immediate attacks. In return, you retain full operational control of the Hartwell land. You will have access to Blackwood capital to implement your breeding programs, your sustainable grazing, all the ideas your father's creditors called foolish. Why?" The word was a blade. "Why betray your own blood?" A shadow crossed his face, a flicker of profound pain. "Because my father didn't just ruin yours. He killed a man, not with a gun, but with a ledger. A good man who left behind a family. I stood by and did nothing. I won't make that mistake again. I've spent 28 years being my father's heir. I want to spend the rest being my own man. This is my first step. Desperation is a potent poison. It makes you consider drinking from a vessel you know is tainted. Marrying a Blackwood felt like driving a stake through my father's heart. But losing the ranch, the last living piece of him and my mother, felt like dying myself. The wedding was a transaction, a dusty judge, 2 silent witnesses who were Caleb's men, and the cold weight of a gold band on my finger. I wore my mother's wedding dress, and with every step, I whispered an apology to her ghost. Moving into Blackwood Manor was like entering the lion's den. The house was a Gothic monstrosity of timber and stone, a monument to Silas's oppressive wealth. I expected hostility. I was prepared for it. I was not prepared for Caleb's quiet respect. He gave me my own wing, a suite of rooms with a view of the distant Hartwell Hills. He never entered without permission, never demanded a thing. He was a ghost in his own home, leaving books on advanced ranching techniques outside my door, notes on the weather, small, quiet gestures that frayed the edges of my hatred. The true enemy was Silas. The first time I saw him at the dinner table, his eyes, a colder, crueler version of Caleb's, raked over me like I was a head of cattle he was assessing for slaughter. "So, the Hartwell Spitfire," he'd sneered, not even addressing me directly. "Tell me, boy, does she have her father's fire, or did that die with him?" Caleb's hand tightened around his fork, but his voice was calm. "Elara is my wife. You will address her with respect." The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. This was the first battle in our war, and Caleb had drawn a line. The challenges came swiftly. A week later, a section of fence on the shared boundary line was cut, and 50 of my prime cattle were mysteriously found on Blackwood grazing land. Silas's foreman, a hulking brute named Jeb, claimed it was trespass and demanded we pay grazing fees. I rode out to confront him myself, my father's journal in my saddlebag, detailing the exact survey lines. "The land your cattle are on," I stated, my voice cutting through the jeers of the Blackwood hands, "was deeded to my grandfather in 1865. By my calculations, Mr. Jeb, it is you who owes me for the last 10 years of illegal use." The men fell silent. Jeb's face turned purple. It was Caleb, arriving silently on his stallion, who sealed it. "The lady is correct," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Jeb, you'll oversee the return of the herd and present Miss Vance, my wife, with a full accounting and payment by week's end. Disobey me, and you're finished in this territory." It was a victory, a small one, but it tasted sweet. That evening, for the first time, Caleb and I sat on the porch, not as adversaries, but as tentative allies. We spoke of land management, of the future. I saw the man beneath, the Blackwood name, a man burdened by a legacy of cruelty, desperately trying to carve a path to honor, and it terrified me, because trusting him felt like a betrayal far greater than marrying him. The fragile peace shattered a month later. Caleb discovered I had been quietly meeting with the other small ranchers Silas had been squeezing, sharing my father's drought-resistant crop rotations, and forming a cooperative to bypass his price fixing. Silas found out. The confrontation erupted in his study. I heard the roar from the hallway. "You're giving our secrets to those parasites," Silas bellowed. "You're undermining everything I've built. She's turned you into a simpering fool." I rushed in to find them nose to nose, a lifetime of resentment boiling over. "I'm building something that will last, Father, something honorable, unlike this empire of bones you've piled up." "Honorable?" Silas spat, his eyes wild. "You think your mother died honorably? She was weak. Her heart gave out because she couldn't bear the strength it takes to win. Just like you." Caleb went very still. The air left the room. "Get out," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get out of my house." Silas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your house? You are nothing without my name. If you stand with her, you are dead to me. You will have nothing." Caleb looked from his father's venomous face to mine. In his eyes, I didn't see hesitation. I saw a final, terrible clarity. "Then I start with nothing," he said. He turned his back on his father, on his inheritance, on his entire world. He took my hand, and together, we walked out of Blackwood Manor forever. The massive oak door slammed shut behind us, the sound as final as a gunshot. We stood in the twilight, the entire Blackwood fortune forfeit. We had only each other, and the ruthless enemy we had just made. As we rode towards the Hartwell Ranch, the place where this began, a single terrifying thought echoed in my mind. We had won the battle, but the war was just beginning, and Silas Blackwood did not lose. He obliterated. To walk away from everything, to stand with the stranger against the only family you've ever known, if your heart is pounding, wondering how they will possibly survive what comes next, then you understand the weight of that choice. Where are you right now, listening to this story? Tell me in the comments. And if you need to know what Silas Blackwood does when he's cornered, if you need to see whether this fragile alliance can weather the coming storm, you must hit that subscribe button, because the next part is where the real war begins, and you will not want to miss it. The silence at Hartwell Ranch was louder than any storm. It was the sound of a future foreclosed. Caleb Blackwood, the heir to a fortune, now stood in my modest kitchen with nothing but the clothes on his back and the determined set of his jaw. The gravity of his sacrifice hung between us, a third presence in the room. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling inadequate. He shook his head, his stormy eyes scanning the familiar, worn space. "Don't be. I should have left that house years ago. I was just waiting for a reason strong enough to pull me out." His gaze settled on me, and the unspoken words, "You were the reason," echoed in the quiet. We had no time for sentiment. Silas Blackwood's retaliation was not a possibility. It was a certainty. It began not with a bang, but with a chilling quiet. The bank in Cheyenne, once persistently nagging, went silent. Our requests for a line of credit to buy seed for the spring planting were met with a void. Then, the suppliers stopped returning my calls. The feed store, the blacksmith, the lumber yard, doors that had been open to the Harts for a generation, were suddenly, politely closed. "He's frozen us out," Caleb confirmed, his voice grim. He'd spent the day riding to town, returning with dust on his coat and frustration in his eyes. "He owns the debt of every business in a 50-mile radius. To cross him is to sign your own bankruptcy." We were an island, and the tide was receding, preparing for a tsunami. Our only advantage was the land itself. Hartwell Ranch was fertile, with a natural spring that Silas had long coveted. We had a small herd of hardy cattle, and the knowledge my father had poured into me. We would have to become self-sufficient, a fortress under siege. Caleb shed his identity as the Blackwood heir like a worn-out coat. He worked from dawn until his hands were raw, mending fences with salvaged wood, digging irrigation ditches alongside the few loyal hands who had stayed, their trust in the Hartwell name outweighing their fear of Silas. I watched him, this man who had been raised in opulence, sweat, and strain, alongside us without a word of complaint. The respect I felt for him was a quiet, growing thing, a seedling pushing through frozen ground. One evening, I found him in the barn, carefully cleaning my father's old saddle. It was a gesture so tender, so respectful, that it stole my breath. "You don't have to do that," I said softly. He looked up, a faint smile touching his lips. "A man should take care of his tools, and his home." The word home settled deep within me. This place was becoming his too. As weeks turned into a harsh, lean month, the walls between us didn't just crumble. They dissolved. The marriage of convenience became a partnership of necessity, and then something more. We shared stories under the vast, starry sky. His of a lonely childhood in a gilded cage, mine of trailing after my father, learning the language of the land. We discovered a shared dry humor that was our defense against the despair that lapped at our doorstep. I found myself noticing the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the quiet strength in his shoulders, the surprising gentleness of his touch when he handed me a cup of coffee. The line between our performance and our reality began to blur. One night, after a grueling day shoring up the barn roof against the coming winter, our hands brushed as we reached for the same water dipper. A spark, sharp and undeniable, jolted between us. We both froze. The air crackled, thick with everything we hadn't dared to say. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. The first direct attack came with the first frost. We woke to find the north pasture gate swung wide open. Not cut, just opened. A subtle, cruel act. 20 head of cattle were gone, likely scattered deep into the canyons by Silas's men. It would take days to find them, if we found them at all. Resources we didn't have, wasted. Caleb's face was a mask of cold fury. This is him telling us he can get to us any time, that we're not safe. The siege was tightening. Our food stores were dwindling. The hope that had initially fueled us began to wane, replaced by the grim reality of our situation. We were losing. It was in this atmosphere of desperation that I made a decision. I would go to the other ranchers. We had started a cooperative. Now was the time to activate it. If we pooled our resources, we could create our own supply line, bypass Silas's stranglehold. Caleb was vehemently against it. "It's too dangerous. My father will see it as an act of war. He'll crush them to get to you." "We are already at war," I argued, my voice rising. "And we are losing. Would you have us starve quietly? My father didn't raise me to surrender." The fight that followed was our first real one, born of fear and exhaustion. It ended with him gripping my shoulders, his eyes blazing with a terrifying mix of anger and fear. "He will destroy you, Elara, and I will not lose you." In that moment, I saw it. The depth of his feeling, raw and unprotected. The last of my defenses shattered. I reached up, my hand cupping his jaw. "You won't," I whispered, and then he kissed me. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a surrender, a promise. It was the answer to all the unspoken questions between us. When we finally broke apart, the world had shifted on its axis. The bargain was dead. In its place was something real, something fierce, and something terrifyingly fragile. The next day I rode out alone to the neighboring ranches. Caleb's warning echoed in my mind, but my resolve was steel. The first two families turned me away, their fear of Silas a physical presence in their homes. But at the third, the McCullough homestead, I found a flicker of the old spirit. Old man McCullough, his back bent from a lifetime of labor, listened to my plea. "Silas Blackwood is a blight," he grumbled. "But he's a powerful blight. What you're asking, it's a mighty risk." "Starvation is a certainty," I replied, holding his gaze. "This is just a risk." He agreed to a small secret trade. It was a start. Emboldened, I rode for home as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. A fragile hope bloomed in my chest. It was short-lived. As I approached the final ridge overlooking Hartwell Ranch, I saw the smoke, not the gentle wisp from a chimney, but a thick black column of destruction coiling into the twilight sky. My heart seized. I kicked my horse into a gallop, fear a metallic taste in my mouth. The barn. It was the barn. The scene that greeted me was one from my nightmares. The structure was an inferno, flames clawing at the night sky. The acrid smell of burning hay and timber filled the air. Caleb and our two ranch hands were a frantic bucket brigade, their figures silhouetted against the hellish glow, their efforts pathetic against the roaring fire. I leaped from my horse, grabbing a bucket. Caleb's face was streaked with soot and sweat, his eyes wild. "The horses!" I screamed over the roar. "We got them out!" he yelled back. We fought side by side, our world reduced to heat, smoke, and the desperate fight to stop the flames from spreading to the homestead. It felt like hours before the fire began to die, having consumed everything it could. Finally, all that remained was a smoldering skeleton, a black scar on the land. We stood there, the four of us, covered in grime, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and shock. The barn was gone. Our winter feed, the tools, my father's old wagon, all of it, ash. One of the hands, a young man named Eli, was staring at the ground near the barn's entrance. He bent down and picked up something, his face pale. He walked over and handed it to Caleb. It was a branded piece of leather, cut from a saddle, and burned into it was the unmistakable Blackwood brand, a stylized B inside a circle. The message was clear. This was not an accident. This was a warning, a declaration. A cold, murderous rage settled over Caleb's features, something I had never seen in him before. It was the look of a Blackwood. He crumpled the leather in his fist. "This ends now?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. But as the shock began to recede, a colder, more insidious thought began to form in my mind. The fire was brutal, obvious, but the opened gate, that had been subtle, clever. This felt different, more desperate. Later that night, as we sat in shell-shocked silence in the kitchen, I voiced my doubt. "Caleb, this doesn't feel like your father. It's too messy. He prefers to break people slowly, financially. This is a tantrum." He looked up, his eyes haunted. "You don't know him like I do. When he's cornered, when his control is challenged, this is exactly what he does. He burns it all down." "But the brand," I pressed, "it's too obvious. He's too smart to leave his calling card." "Or he's so arrogant he wants us to know it was him," Caleb countered, his jaw tight. "He wants us to live in fear." The argument felt hollow. A disconnect yawned between us, fed by our different upbringings, our different understandings of the enemy. The trust we had so carefully built felt suddenly brittle. The next morning, as we sifted through the wreckage, I found it. Partially buried in the soft earth near the back of the barn, where the fire had started, was a small metal object. It wasn't a branding iron, it was a tinderbox, a very specific ornate tinderbox I had seen before. My blood ran cold. I had seen it on the belt of Jeb, Silas's foreman, the man Caleb had publicly humiliated. I didn't show Caleb. A sickening suspicion was coiling in my gut. What if the enemy wasn't just outside our gates? What if the threat was more complex, more personal than we had ever imagined? The fire may have been set by a Blackwood hand, but was it on Silas's order? Or was someone else playing a deeper game, using the cover of this war to settle their own scores? I pocketed the tinderbox, its weight feeling like a leaden secret in my palm. The siege was not just from the outside. It was within, and the greatest danger might not be the man we thought was our enemy, but the one we had begun to call an ally, a kiss in the shadows, a fire in the night, and a secret that could burn it all to the ground. The line between ally and enemy has just vanished. If you're holding your breath, wondering who truly set that fire and what Elara will do with this dangerous truth, you're not alone. Tell me your theory in the comments, and if you need to know if the real enemy is inside the gates, if you need to see whether this newfound love can survive a betrayal this deep, then you must subscribe. Part 3 is the final explosive confrontation, and the truth will change everything. The tinderbox in my pocket felt like a live coal, burning a hole through my dress and my conscience. I watched Caleb across the ashes of the barn, his shoulders set in a line of grim resolve, and the secret between us grew teeth. He saw Silas's signature in the smoke. I saw a more complicated, more intimate treachery. To voice my suspicion of Jeb was to question Caleb's understanding of his own father, to imply he couldn't see the viper in his own nest. The trust we'd forged in fire was now being tested by ash. We worked in a heavy silence, clearing the charred wreckage. Every time Caleb looked at me, his gaze was shadowed with a protective fury I knew was directed at his father. I felt like a traitor, nursing my secret, but a colder, more pragmatic part of me, the part that was my father's daughter, knew that revealing a hand without seeing the whole arm was a sure way to get bit. "I'm riding into town," Caleb announced abruptly, wiping soot from his brow with a torn sleeve. "I'll confront him. End this." My heart slammed against my ribs. No, that's exactly what he wants. He'll have you arrested or worse. It's what the brand was for. To provoke you into a reckless move. "What would you have me do, Elara?" he demanded, frustration boiling over. "Wait for him to burn the house down around us? Wait for him to hurt you?" "I would have you think," I shot back, stepping closer. "This isn't a duel. It's a chess game, and you're playing like it's checkers. He's trying to make you emotional, to make you stupid. Don't give him what he wants." The words hung in the air, harsh and true. He stared at me, the anger in his eyes warring with the dawning realization that I was right. The Blackwood way was force. The Hartwell way, my way, was strategy. "Then what's our move?" he asked, his voice quieter. "We find proof, not of who he is, we know that, proof of what he's done, something the law can't ignore." I took a deep breath, my hand closing around the tinderbox in my pocket. "And we start by looking closer to home." I led him to the back of the barn, to the spot where I'd found the tinderbox. I showed him the faint scuffed boot prints leading away from the property, towards the dense woods that separated our land from the Blackwood holdings. They were too small to be Silas's. "He didn't do this himself. He sent someone, and that someone was careless." Caleb picked up the tinderbox, his thumb tracing the intricate design. His face went pale. "This is Jeb's," he whispered, the certainty in his voice chilling. "My father gave it to him after he bungled a cattle drive 10 years ago. A reminder to be better." He looked at me, a storm of betrayal and understanding in his eyes. "You knew?" "I suspected. I didn't want to believe you were blind to the snakes in your own house." He nodded slowly, the last of his naivete crumbling away. "Then we find Jeb. We make him talk." We tracked the boot prints for a mile into the woods before they faded into a rocky creek bed. Our hope was fading with the light when we heard it, the low, agitated whinny of a horse and the sound of a man's voice, cursing. We crept forward, using the thick pines for cover. In a small clearing, Jeb was trying to calm a skittish bay mare, its flank lathered. Tied to his saddle was a bundle of my father's journals, ones I kept in the house. He hadn't just come to burn the barn, he'd come to steal my legacy. Rage, white-hot and pure, eclipsed my fear. I stepped into the clearing, Caleb a half step behind me. "Looking for a bedtime story, Jeb?" He spun around, his hand flying to his gun. But Caleb was faster, his Colt already drawn and leveled. "I wouldn't," Caleb said, his voice like ice. Jeb's eyes darted between us, calculating his odds. He was a bully, not a gunfighter. He slowly raised his hands. "The old man sent me, wanted to scare you off. The journals were my idea. Thought there might be something valuable in them." "You're a liar," Caleb said, taking a step forward. "My father doesn't use fire. He uses lawyers. This was you. You're trying to frame him for something he didn't do to cover your own tracks. What are you really after, Jeb? A sheen of sweat broke out on Jeb's brow. The facade was cracking. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about the herd you've been siphoning from the north pasture for years, Caleb said, his aim never wavering. I'm talking about the supplies you've been selling on the side. I looked the other way because you were loyal to my father. But this? He gestured with the gun towards the direction of our burned barn. This is a whole new game, and the penalty for arson and theft is a long stretch in a federal prison, or a short rope. The mention of the stolen herd broke him. His shoulders slumped. It wasn't just me. Silas, he knew. He looked the other way, took his cut. But then you left, and the money dried up. I needed a new stake. I thought if I could push you out, I could buy this land from the bank for a song once you were gone. Silas would get his land, and I'd get my cut. It was just business. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Silas wasn't just a ruthless businessman, he was a criminal conspirator, and Caleb had been living in the middle of it, willfully blind. You're coming with us, I said, my voice trembling with fury. You're going to tell that story to the sheriff. But Jeb's eyes, desperate and cornered, darted past us. I ain't going to no prison. He made his move, a fool's gamble, going for his gun. The world slowed. The crack of Caleb's Colt was a single, sharp thunderclap that ripped through the quiet of the woods. Jeb crumpled, clutching his shoulder, his gun skittering into the underbrush. Caleb stood over him, smoke curling from the barrel, his expression unreadable. He had just crossed a line from which there was no return. We tied Jeb to his saddle and led him and his confession back to the ranch. The following hours were a blur of lawmen and statements. Jeb, facing a long prison term, sang like a canary, implicating Silas in a decade of systematic fraud and theft. A warrant was issued for Silas Blackwood's arrest. The final confrontation didn't happen in a dramatic shootout. It happened in his study, where it had all begun. We arrived with the sheriff and his deputies to find the empire in collapse. Silas sat behind his massive oak desk, a shell of the tyrant he had been. The news had traveled fast. His creditors were already circling, his power evaporating like mist. He looked at Caleb, not with anger, but with a profound, weary contempt. You finally did it. You destroyed your own name to save a patch of dirt and a Hartwell wench. Caleb didn't rise to the bait. He simply looked at the man who had sired him, his eyes clear of the old ghosts. No, father. You destroyed it. I'm just building a new one that doesn't have your stink on. It. They led Silas away in handcuffs. There was no satisfaction in it, only a hollow, terrible finality. The war was over. Weeks later, the first green shoots of spring were pushing through the blackened earth where the barn had stood. We were rebuilding, this time together, with a clarity that had been forged in fire and truth. The Hartwell Blackwood brand was now a symbol of resilience, not conflict. I found Caleb at the fence line, looking out over the valley that was now truly ours. He turned as I approached, and the love in his eyes was a solid, real thing, no longer shadowed by the past. Do you ever wonder what would have happened? I asked, leaning against the post beside him. If I'd slammed the door in your face that first day? He smiled, a true, easy smile that reached his eyes. Every day, I thank God you were more desperate than you were proud. He pulled me into his arms, and I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. The wind that had once screamed of desperation now carried the scent of fresh-cut timber and new beginnings. We had started with a lie, built on a bargain, and almost broken by a secret. But we had ended with the truth, built on a partnership, and sealed by a love that had proven stronger than the legacies we had inherited. Our story wasn't just about survival. It was about choosing the future you build over the past you're given. And as the sun set, painting the sky in peaceful shades of gold and rose, I knew we had chosen right. From a desperate bargain to a bullet in the woods, their journey reminds us that the greatest battles are often fought within, between the past we inherit and the future we dare to choose. If this story of resilience and redemption found a home in your heart, let us know in the comments. And if you believe in second chances and new beginnings, tap that like button and subscribe to the channel, because here, even the wildest frontiers can become a place to call home.